people want bang for their buck. If they're making a grant or a donation, and this is so Australian, Joe, isn't it? We just love our dollar to go that bit further. So if we know there's a bit of matched funding, or we know that if I put this in, I know that this business down the road will put some in too. So leveraging those dollars and seeing them go a little further, that's really popular too.
This week we sat down with Dr Wendy Scaife. Wendy is an Associate Professor and Director at the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Not-for-Profit Studies at Queensland University of Technology. We talked about her expansive work in the not-for-profit and philanthropy sector, including her time as a CEO of the Leukemia Foundation. She has dedicated her life to philanthropy and has researched the many ways that people give, especially in a planned versus spontaneous way. We discuss philanthropy in general, the importance of instilling the culture of giving, and how to give in more effective ways. Given our conversation covered such a diverse range of interesting topics, I've decided to share it over 2 episodes. This is part 1, and I'll be sharing part 2 as our next episode. Make sure you tune into both to hear the conversation with Wendy, and please enjoy the episode. So, I'm joined by Associate Professor Wendy Scaife, the Director of the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Not-for-Profit Studies at QUT Business School. How are you, Wendy?
Tip top, thanks, Joe. Always happy to be talking to someone interesting and about a topic as beautiful as giving.
Yeah, I'm very excited to go through a whole bunch of questions with you. We've had a few chats offline, and I know that you've worked in charities, undertaken a PhD, led a Centre for Philanthropy and Not-for-Profit Studies at QUT, and all of this whilst you've been raising you raised a family. Tell us a little bit about your journey and really how you've had the time to do all of this.
I guess I'm of the generation where it was okay to go on to university. It was okay to plan a career. So studied in the 70s. And so for me, it was always going to be a mix. And my belief is that everybody works out the right kind of mix for them. And it's different. And I never judge anyone for being a full-time homemaker or a full-time worker. For me, the mix was to be able to do part-time work once I had started that family side of things, but still be really involved in the community and in the kids' school, but still have some time where I was inching my work forward, inching my knowledge forward, and delighting the grandparents by enabling them to have particular days with our 2 children. So I guess that's for me that's really important. I always felt that I was a better mother for the fact that I was more fulfilled and had that interest, and that's what worked for me. So yeah.
And in what ways do you think the kids have benefited from the work that you've done? Has there been any interesting insights from that point of view?
Sure. I was just saying to someone yesterday, Joe, that I guess, again, coming from the era that I did, I put a sticker that said girls can do anything on our daughter's pink trike. And she took that to heart. So our daughter actually works internationally in fashion events, and through COVID and all the rest of it, does the couture routine with Paris and Milan and Greek islands, etc.
Wow.
And yeah, it sounds very glamorous. Trust me, it is not.
Yeah, it seems like probably a lot of hard work, I'm sure.
Sheer hard work and a lot of, shall we say, personalities.
Yeah.
But I guess, so I think that it gives kids the permission to seek what works for them, not necessarily to feel like they need to be a clone by any means, but to just find what floats their boat. Our daughter, for instance, at 14, saw the Victoria's Secret fashion parade and said, that's what I want to do. I want to produce shows like that.
Yeah, cool.
And so, yeah, so I think that permission to succeed. But I guess in our other part of our life, we have a small farm. And so our son is more interested in flannelette shirts, not necessarily traveling anywhere, cows, motorbikes, those kinds of things. So, so I'm not certain that I've had as much influence on him.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It must be. I suppose it would be a challenge for parents to be able to see their kids doing things that are so different, and wondering and worrying and stressing over whether their choices and the rest of it. Credit to you for supporting them in what they actually love. I think that's ultimately what it sounds like you've been doing.
I think so. And the other key thing that I would say, I really, really hope, and I do see that the value of kindness is absolutely rampant in them both, and they have the right heart, and I think that couldn't make me prouder as a parent. I think there are many types of wealth in this world, Joe, and that one that people actually care about those around them and will go out of their way and feel a responsibility for people beyond their own circle. I think that's pretty important.
Yep. So take me through, and I'd love to have the listeners hear a little bit about your academic career and your professional career, because it's quite an interesting one.
Sure. So very quickly, I did a business communication degree in the 70s when it was all very new. Why would you study communication? Surely everybody knows how to communicate. So I love to write and I love to communicate. So, and it can be done in a more managed and professional and empathetic way. So I suppose that that was a great start for me. And for me, it was kind of like the arts degree of business, because it gave you those skills, but a broad understanding of people. And so I have found that that base has taken me all sorts of different directions. So I was in a retail environment, I was in a property environment. Then I had my own consultancy for a while and freelance writing, and worked in a bigger consultancy. And then all of that time, I was also part-time lecturing in what was then a very new degree in communication, because they didn't have people with this skill. So people who had been quite new graduates, we had that opportunity to come back and lecture. And I found that I really, really enjoyed that connection with the students. And so had the opportunity to become a full-time lecturer. And at that stage also decided to start a master's. And because I'd always been interested in charities, I'd always been interested in community, and because I'd had the kind of heavy corporate experience, I really relished the fact that our students would do projects for charities or help start new charities or whatever. And so that for me was really interesting. And what happened while I was coming to be a full-time lecturer and starting my Master of Business and doing my research on how companies can optimize their involvement with the community. It was kind of like, bringing those two things together. And at the same time, QUT, where I work, decided it wanted to bring in fundraising as a tertiary level course for the first time. So they sent me to the States to study fundraising. And to then work with some really senior and wonderful fundraisers to actually start that as a course. And that course still runs, 32 years later. And I think that's a pretty important, people they misjudge what fundraising is. And actually it's basically just getting people involved in the issues that are around them in society. And telling the story of organisations that do good things and need that story to go out so that others can be involved in growing that. So yes, and then I started a family and wanted to work part-time, and I'd been volunteering at the Leukemia Foundation, and they said, we can see you're a bit bored. Why don't you come in and do 1 day a week with us? Which I did, and I loved. And then 1 day a week turned into ultimately becoming the CEO. And
wow.
And then having the opportunity with a bunch of fabulous people to try and take what was happening here in Queensland for people with leukemia and related blood diseases, take that national. And so being part of forming a national organisation that operates today and just helps so many more people scaling up. And then whilst I was there, the organization, the board were very good. And they said, well, you've got this academic background, there's need for more knowledge. Why don't you do your PhD? We'll, support you around the edges to go and study what happens overseas, etc. And so I did that. And at that stage, this centre that I now work in was just starting, Joe. So it all kind of slotted in, and I thought, oh, I'll come back for a year now that I've got the PhD in this space, and just make sure that I use some of that. And who knows, after a year, I'll go and, I don't know, work in government. I've never done that, those kinds of things. But of course, I loved it so much, and I loved my time working in a charity so much that I find people, once they fall into that sector, they tend not to fall out of it. So I stayed, and I get to work with all of these people that are actually fabulous, people who are starting charities, who are leading nonprofit organizations, social enterprises, philanthropic foundations. And yeah, so it's been a really interesting journey, mostly because of the people.
So Wendy, where do you think your passion comes from? Can you trace a moment in your life where your passion for philanthropy was initiated?
Sure. Well, I can make a couple of comments there. Certainly, all of the research will tell us, Joe, that so much of this is socialised in us when we're young. So not exclusively, that's not to say that, you can't just have this thing innately, but if we see our parents, doing tuck shop or being part of Lions or, being involved in their community in some way, or giving at Christmas, or maybe even sitting down with the family, Joe, and saying, hey, kids, we've got this amount that we might be able to give away this year. What do you reckon we should be thinking about giving to? So there's all kinds of socialisation. For me, certainly my parents were involved in their communities. And so, what it's like as a kid, you're there slicing the tomatoes or doing whatever it might be. And so we were encouraged to do that. I guess to some degree, again, all of the research will tell us that if you have a faith-based, that actually will mean that you're more likely to give. And that, that was a part of my life, but it wasn't a huge part of my life. I would say there were many influences. But I think also that it comes down to the experiences that you have. So if something happens to people that you care about, then yes, you all of a sudden come in contact with organisations that you never knew existed and with help that you never knew was out there. So I had a friend quite young someone she loved got leukemia. And so, you start to volunteer and that kind of thing. And I guess because I was a writer, one of my experiences that was a very good one and why I ended up at the Leukemia Foundation was I sat on a plane going to a conference in Sydney when I was a lecturer, and the bloke beside me happened to be the CEO of the Leukemia Foundation. And I think it was his way that no matter who sat beside him, Joe, would end up involved at the foundation. So it was kind of like volunteer recruitment.
I'm sure there was a lot more than that, Wendy, but yes, it's good.
Well, Joe, it was, and for me, it was very smoothly done. He very quickly realised that I could write. They had a need for some of their patient information booklets to be rewritten. And so how easy was that to use a skill? And then how good did I feel about being a part of, a team and using my little skill to be able to make a difference? I could never cure anything, but, I could use what I had. And then, of course, to fall into working in a charity, I can't tell you what that meant to me. I can't tell you what that decade did in my life in terms of opening up an understanding at quite a young age of what can happen in a life and to a family, and the roller coaster, and handling stress and figuring out what's important in life and what's important in death, and also all of the people who volunteered and people who gave, and just finding the caliber of character and individual, and the marathon that so many of them would actually put in, and the joy that they would get out of doing that. It changed my life, I have to say. And so I would, when I would lecture, I used to say to the students, spend some time in a nonprofit, either as a volunteer or as part of your career, because it really is another whole dimension to life, and it's life's rich tapestry, and it brings, sometimes we can sail on the surface of life. We can be very fortunate. And so I think that it's just really, really interesting that we've got that opportunity. Yeah.
So, you know, like I reflect on the fact that, you know, doing a PhD, undertaking any form of research, there's a clear inherent cost, otherwise everyone would be doing it. And so the reason that I asked the question is around what motivates you and drives you. Is it must have been significant, and I can hear that it is, for you to have conducted the research that you've done, which would have been all consuming, I imagine. So I really want to delve into now the research that you have conducted, and if you could maybe give us a quick overview on what you've done there.
Sure. So I'm very happy to talk, from PhD on. And the interesting thing with PhD, you talk about cost. So if you take that in the financial sense, Joe, when you do a higher degree research within Australia, because we are thirsty for knowledge, people don't actually pay for that degree. So unlike all of the rest of universities, so it is a wonderful opportunity for people, and sometimes they might even get a scholarship to be able to help with that, to get living expenses. But for the most part, you have to have a passion, you have to love to write, you have to be willing to settle in for a marathon and find a topic you love. My topic was around the marketing and improving the marketing and funding for Australian medical research, given my experiences at the Leukemia Foundation. And so that led me into this working at the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies. And I guess we work in 4 key themes. We help the sector to be more accountable, to be well-led, to be socially innovative, and to be well-resourced. And so there's been a host of research around those kinds of topics. For me, my particular area has been about resourcing. And so figuring out why people give, why they don't give, why companies are involved in giving, and how people get into this business of giving, particularly if they've got a bit to share. If they're in that lucky space where they have some discretionary funds and they might like to do this maybe even generationally. So it's a wide range of research over that time, but also deep diving into some particular areas, be that the arts or health, etc., giving to women and girls, different types of areas like that.
Yeah. So, what do you think the sort of trigger points are to kick off a family's venture into more structured giving?
Sure. So I will go to the research here, Joe, because we know the beautiful thing about evidence is that you can say, well, we know what actually makes the difference. So the big one is belief that giving can make a difference. And we're talking about here philanthropists as opposed to everyday household givers who are wonderful and plentiful. But for philanthropists who are wanting to make an investment, I suppose, rather than a gift, they firstly have to have that belief that giving can make a difference. And then the next thing is a desire to give back to the community. For many people, that wealth has been made through business and, the hard labour of the people around them, or else the community has been good to them. Perhaps they've been a refugee and they've then gone on to succeed here in Australia. And so that sense of giving back. A sense of personal satisfaction from giving is also equally important. And I think I referred to that, in terms of the joy of giving that people so often talk about. And we interview a lot of philanthropists, and they will reflect on what a difference it's made to them as a person, to their networks, and to their perspectives on life and on what's important. For a lot of people, it fits with their philosophical beliefs. So perhaps, something like the environment, Joe, or faith, it depends on, or the arts. There's huge passions that we all have. Different things resonate for different ones of us. And that's great because it means that, the gamut, international giving, animals, the whole area actually has some true believers in a way. Desire to set an example, just to go down our list, and then personal involvement with the organisation will very often motivate giving. We, of course, love to be able to see giving in action and to see need and opportunity in action. So if you're a volunteer or pro bono in some way involved with an organisation, gosh, it hits you in the face. You actually then become the storyteller for the organisation because, you know, people might talk about statistics of this thing happening, domestic violence or whatever it might be, but you can actually tell the story of individuals and people and the sheer need that is out there. And for many people, it's a desire to continue supporting the same cause or organisation. So it's something that becomes a lifelong and growing investment for
So
people.
it seems like a bit of a legacy for some individuals to really continue to assist a particular cause on a more ongoing and strategic, longer term basis.
Yes, it is, and particularly, you know, my age group, you know, the a few wrinkles kind of age group, you tend to volunteer and give to an organisation over a very long period of time, often a lifetime. Whereas our younger people, certainly in all of the research, it's more a serial approach. So not cornflakes, serial as in, you know, visit one cause and do your bit there, and then, right, I'm on to something fresh.
What's next? Yep.
Not wanting to marry that cause for life. So it is different with the generations.
What about, do you see any positive trends that are arising in giving at the moment, or are there more worrying signs?
So people are, there are some beautiful trends, Joe.
Right.
One of the most common one that I see increasingly is collaborative giving.
Okay.
Last night, for instance, I was at Queensland's Giving Circle for Women, which is called Women and Change. And that's where we all put in, for this circle, it's $1,000 each. So we had $100 and something $1,000 to be able to give away. There were 3 finalists who had applied for those, and these are small organisations for whom the amounts would make a huge difference. And so they each presented, and then we got to vote. And then, you know, somebody got the top amount, and then somebody got the second amount, and so forth. And so that joy of being with others, of learning about your community, about learning about need, but also learning about the fabulous way that really innovative people are working hard to fill that need, and seeing my $1,000 multiplied so many times over to make a big impact. So collaborative giving, and we see it also with the foundations, Joe. You know, people will have a particular project, it's larger, and it's no one foundation might be able to fund it or wish to fund it. And so they talk to others. They pick up the phone and say, hey, we're interested in doing this. Do you have some spare capacity? Would you like to talk about, you know, co-funding? And quite often that's getting to be a round table of people that are doing that. And again, it's multiplying the joy, in this case of grant making, and again, being able to take each other further, challenge each other, grow as a result of making that a more collaborative activity. So that's one of the great things. In terms of other things that we are seeing, certainly people are getting into giving younger, so bigger giving younger.
Okay, yep.
Which is great. So people, I guess, you know, they're doing well in their job, or they've had some benefit from money passed down, and they are choosing to give that away earlier. It seems that, you know, the millennials and the generation below are very much attuned to giving being embedded as part of their life. So it's not something separate that they will write a check to be involved in. It's kind of like, okay, so how can I get my workplace behind this? This really needs to happen. How can I get a bunch of friends together? We might do a cycling marathon, and we'll do some peer-to-peer funding. And I might sort of think about like making a big gift, because I know that that amount will actually achieve this, and I can, you know, there's a concrete outcome. So that's kind of lovely. There's some not so good things happening. So giving participation is going down. So we can track this. We do studies called Giving Australia, and we can track that. And we also study, the tax deductible giving data from the ATO each year. We have that data going back to 1978, so we can see all of the trends. And more people, more dollars are being given, and that's fabulous. That's filling more need, but fewer people are getting involved in giving.
So,
and we really could look at a stage where giving might flatline a bit. And that's because people are not feeling giving is affordable. They don't feel the level of uncertainty means that people are feeling that they might need to just, hold that back because you don't know what's around the corner. But there's an interesting thing in giving, Joe, called psychic poverty. And that is where you have two people and they might have absolutely identical assets, income, ability to give. One will feel that they have no ability to give. The other will feel abundant and will feel, okay, wow, how lucky am I? I can spare a bit to do this.
Do you think that there's a sense in you that part of the answer to that is a greater level of engagement with advisors to actually understand?
Yes, I think you're quite right, Joe. It's advisors of any kind. So we do studies with, we call them professional advisors. So it might be a financial advisor, it might be a succession advisor, it might be an estate advisor, accountants by all means. And we also ask people where they expect to find out details about giving and structures and all of that. And by and large, they say their accountant. But most accountants probably are not across this, Joe. It's quite a specialised area. And but in terms of in talking to people who have set up these kinds of structures and unpacking, what were your steps and who was involved, to a person, there will be a financial advisor involved in that process to assist them and to enable them to do that in the wisest possible way and in the way that fulfills the legal requirements as well. So obviously there's legal assistance as well.
Yeah, I was also thinking about, obviously when geopolitical issues raise their ugly heads, when there's market volatility and distortions, and when people are, as an example, on the ground finding young people are struggling to find their first home, I wonder whether the financial issues that present after some turmoil actually feeds its way back into giving. Have you got any observation around, periods of time during the global financial crisis versus now, anything like that?
Yep. Yeah, what a really interesting question, Joe. And I think that, global financial crisis, we've had a lot of crises through the years, from
we sure
1929 stock market crash, Pearl Harbor, and the smart people around the world have studied giving post those crises. And in almost all cases, giving has bounced back. So it might take longer in some cases, but in almost all cases, it has really risen to the occasion again, but it might have taken 2 or 3 years to get there and for confidence to grow. But then it starts to grow again, that lovely trajectory of beyond inflation giving. It doesn't, if you were to ask me, Joe, do people give as much as they could? I'd adamantly say no, we don't.
No.
I don't, other people don't. There are people who tithe, who set a particular percentage that they would like to aim for, and that's a very good discipline.
Yep.
So there's things like the 1% club, and then I think the question is then very adroitly asked, could you live on 99% of your income? And most of us, by crikey, we could. And, then you might ask, could you live on 90% of your income? And could 10% go somewhere else? And there's those kind of really intriguing questions that we can ask of ourselves. And I guess when it comes back to the joy of giving, when it comes back to all we were talking about in terms of people having connection with a particular cause and it adding such meaning and purpose to their life, that 10%, might well be more. So yeah, there's all sorts of interesting questions that emerge.
Yeah. Do you think, as a starting point, when you might start with a family, do you think there is they could use giving as a mechanism to pass on some sort of family values and culture?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we did a great study on this, and that point you've raised so well there, Joe, came out so strongly. It was probably the most important point as to why people structured their giving. It was to express their values. So, to do something in a substantive way that really was about who they are and what they stand for. But more than that, it was what their family stands for. And so you can appreciate when someone sets up a foundation, the next generation may well get involved. There are some foundations, Joe, that involve their children from young ages, from primary school. And, that comment that I was talking about for everyday families, just sitting down and figuring out, well, who are we going to give to at Christmas? Or next year, we've got, this amount to give away. Where do you think we should give it? So getting that early sense of the family being a giving family, of valuing community, and that being an expression of who you are, and that tradition being passed down. I think that's really important. And you see such interesting things in the foundations. The Maya Foundation have got a fourth generation group, and being given pots of money at a younger age to be able to figure out, well, what would you like to do? To gain that experience of how do you do due diligence? How do you find out what needs are out there? And then how do you engage and how do you judge whether that's worked well? And the interesting thing is, of course, that the next generations might well want to give to something totally different, and often do want to give to something totally different to what their parents' generation might have done. And that's a great thing, because new needs emerge all of the time and new opportunities.
That's absolutely wonderful. I often find that, during conversations around estate planning and gifting, it can be quite challenging for parents to work out whether to gift during their life or gift post their death. But rarely is the conversation around whether or not, and how impactful gifting to the kids through this mechanism, allowing them and affording them the ability to gift to others, could be so meaningful and impactful to the next generation. I think that's something that I think we could, as financial advisors, let's talk on our behalf. We could work really hard to try to improve that. Not to tell anyone what they should be doing or drive the strategy for the family, but to at least uncover what might be the benefits, so a clear choice can be made.
Absolutely. And I think that just asking that question, Joe, opens up, as I said, a new dimension for a whole heap of people who might have been really, really busy making that money and not had time to be involved in their community. They've done a stellar job of creating jobs for people and, building a business, building an asset. But gosh, it's taken their time. And, there've been some boom and bust in all of that. And so giving hasn't figured on their agenda. If their life hasn't been touched by something, if they haven't been drawn into a cause of some kind, a charity, then it may have not touched their lives. And then all of a sudden they might sell that business and they've got a capital gain. And, their accountant starts to talk to them about, well, there's many options here for this nest egg, this windfall. And those options can be life-changing as well. So I think that that's something we're seeing more and more, for sure.
This is a particularly tricky one to actually navigate with you. It's almost a little irksome to bring up, but when a client or a family actually does come into a lot of money, more money than they would actually foreseeably need now and into the future, it's interesting that, looking in on that, you would think that comes with, a great amount of utility, and in some ways it does, but in another way, there is a burden of responsibility that seems to be quite consuming. And I'm certainly not wanting to make the case that it's woe is me, I've made money, but I think it's interesting to talk about the fact that there is these other issues that come with those that come into money and those that have decisions like this to make.
Yeah, look, I think there's a few angles there, Joe. Certainly people talk to us when they're talking about their next generation about the burden of wealth and about wanting their next generation to, or their grandkids, to really not let the money ruin their life, not to have too much too soon, not to appreciate what they have. So that common sense approach, I think, in terms of balance, is why a lot of people are structuring giving and maybe getting the children onto the board at 16, 18, whatever it might be, or onto committees and involvement. So there's that sense of the burden of wealth. When you have that wealth yourself, yes, there are responsibilities, and they can be, obviously with the right advice, to make sure that you have the right structure and comply with the few laws that are around this, that you can actually set up something very simply in a way. You can be as adventurous or as narrow in your grant making directions as you want. You can spend it all down very quickly. You can choose to have it as something that is going to have a lot of impact over a long period of time. So the choice sits with the individual, and I think this is exactly right. But we do see all kinds of varieties of particularly the private ancillary funds, but also people going off and setting up a sub-fund within a community foundation, for instance, where a lot of the grant making is then done by the organisation within the suggestions that are set up for your particular foundation. So that's an area that I think we're going to see a lot more growth in, particularly for people of emerging wealth, to put a toe in the water, to have that kind of easing in, as well as those who want to set up their own structure, and sometimes people have both.
So Wendy, the actual podcast name is "It's Never About Money." So that I've got a very keen interest on looking at success from the point of view of both financial and non-financial. But the idea that one comes into money and then it becomes easy, everything becomes easy. It seemingly is not necessarily the case from what I see. What do you see families saying about this burden? What do you think the consequences are on children where it's not managed well? I know this is bordering on stuff that is outside maybe, but I'm super interested in this particular issue. I think it's pertinent.
Absolutely, Joe, and it does come up in our conversations. And of course, we never identify the people that we speak to, but I can tell you that I've spoken to numbers of people where the kids have gotten into drugs, and it's just derailed their life, their family. And, there's some very sad stories out there, or people, I guess, being uncertain if their friends like them for who they are or for what they have. And, that sometimes getting in with the wrong company, too many fast cars, there's all sorts of issues that arise with wealth that are a great worry, I think, to families. And that's why I think it is such an increasingly popular thing to set up a vehicle that actually creates meaning and, as we said, an expression of values. It
almost seems like philanthropy is almost a solution to some of the issues that you talk about. And there is no, one solution to the issue, obviously, but it seems like that could be part of a multi-mix solution to that problem.
Totally, Joe. And I think the interesting thing is that it's not easy to give money away well. So this has been said in many ways by great speakers through the centuries. But it is not an easy job to find the right mix of funding that you want to do, or to find that cause. And people talk to us about this. They might go some steps along a particular way. It might be that they've had that long-term relationship with a particular organisational cause, so they kind of have a sense of where they're going. But quite typically, people will talk to us about gaining information from others. And there's all sorts of courses and things that you can do to be able to, to hear how others have gone about this. And I think that peer-to-peer is tremendously important.
So what factors should a charitable family consider when determining, what charities they want to actually get involved with? I mean, there must be some key criteria
Sure.
that you should think about.
So I can tell you from research what they told us.
Okay,
so,
perfect.
This is Giving Australia research. So the factors that were influencing their giving decisions was alignment with their cause, with their passion. So you obviously, I mentioned the phrase true believer. You've got to be giving to something that you think really needs and deserves that money. And that might be something sad and needy, or it might be something that's a wonderful opportunity. It might be giving an opportunity to great musicians or great artists. It's not always about disadvantage. It's sometimes about advantage. I work in an education institution, and the scholarships that have been peppered around universities and schools for years to help people to grow who might not have had the opportunity to study before, these things. So it's about opportunity as well as.
So Wendy, I'm just thinking about the fact that, and I might be right, I might be wrong here, around the idea that seemingly that society is a little bit more fragmented than I remember when I was younger, and communities seem to be a little bit more. I think the word is fragmented. And when I think about social media, it brings up a lot of attention of certain issues, which is a great thing. But I don't know that people have as great a depth of connection with what's going on in whatever they deem to be their community. Would you agree?
No, yes and no. I'm going to sit on the fence on that one.
Okay.
Social media has created new communities, Joe, and new ways for organisations and causes and individuals to get their stories out there. So we see crowdfunding, and in academic terms, crowdfunding has created disintermediation. In other words, cutting out the middleman. Mm-hmm. So people are setting up as individuals and saying, "Hey, we've got these needs. Please give us money." Now, if a charity's not involved in the middle of that, for a start, you might not have tax deductibility, but you also might not have the wealth of experience that a charity has had about giving away money. Mm-hmm. We saw this a lot in the bushfires and in the disasters. Yep. Whilst there is, there's obvious sense in being able to give directly, and people worry about, the admin costs or their donation being frittered away on the car for the CEO or that kind of thing. But I don't think that they realise that the quality of use of the dollars from an experienced charity that's seen all of the fraud and knows what interventions or what help is most needed. I think, that's a very important thing. I like the fact that charities are also put on their mettle by something like that to make sure that what they are doing is better than someone giving directly. So I think that's important. So I guess, I think that we are seeing social media telling the stories of need very well. And we're also, because we love to support a peer, Joe, if you were asking me to help you with something, you know what, Joe, I'm going to say yes. Mm-hmm. So I like Joe. We've gotten to a few chats. And so, that's how life works. We trust the judgment. Joe, if you were raising funds for something and you said, hey, this is really important, and gosh, I had no idea how bad things were, and I'm going to put in a little bit, and, I'm going to talk to my friends, you might like to consider it. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of peer-to-peer is one of the lovely things that comes through technology and through communities like social media. Are we more distant from communities? Possibly so. We are probably gathering less as communities. I was the chair of a community hall in a country area, and I was just amazed at the attendance if we held a function. It was such a novelty for families to be able to gather together in the one space, and we had a whale of a time. I think, and to be able to talk about, in that case, the needs of the hall that was falling down, but, just the things that are going on in the community, or gathering together as a community at the hall to raise funds for something going on in the community. So I think you're right in that we're fragmented more often and less face-to-face, but I think we have new communities.
That's good. Good to hear. Sorry I interrupted you. You were talking about key factors and
Yeah, so we talked about that alignment with passions, and that took us down many side roads there, Joe. Thank you very much. We like to see that the charity has good governance, and this is critical. We have a course here, Joe, and we've been teaching nonprofit leaders for 20 years. And we always say, we've got 8 subjects in this particular course, and we always say, if we could only offer one, what would it be? And it's governance. It's governance, because being able to keep an organisation on an even keel and to lead it well. You know, those things are so very important, because there's no point in people having put money into the organisation in the past if the organisation's not going to sustain. So governance is important. Governance is also, of course, the vision for the future, the innovation that might come. So governance, the perceived competence of the charity. So how well does it do what it does for the community and for the beneficiaries? For a good proportion of people, they definitely want that money to go to the disadvantaged. So that's priority one. It's some form of disadvantage that they are trying to assist. And the final one is people want bang for their buck. If they're making a grant or a donation, and this is so Australian, Joe, isn't it? We just love our dollar to go that bit further. So if we know there's a bit of matched funding, or we know that if I put this in, I know that this business down the road will put some in too. So leveraging those dollars and seeing them go a little further, that's really popular too. We see this in workplace giving, by the way. In our studies, we found that more than 50% of companies actually match their employees' workplace giving.
That's awesome.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.